Teachers, what were the dumbest answers you received from a student on a test or exam? I teach chemistry at the university. The students were given the task of writing an answer in the form of an essay. I can no longer remember what the topic was. In general, one of the students, who did not understand the subject at all, instead of handing in an empty paper, wrote a very detailed story about a lonely dragon who could not make friends with anyone. The other animals felt very sorry for him, and they really wanted to be friends with him. But the problem was that when the dragon was happy, he burned everything around him. The whole story took him 3 or 4 pages, after which the story abruptly had ended, and he still tried to answer the assignment, and I'm still worried about whether the dragon has found friends in the end. Poor thing. I hope he didn't hurt anyone. Name 3 different gases. Answer: air fart gravity. Oh yes, gravity is the heaviest of all gases. On the thermodynamics test, the students had to write down what adiabatic is. One student replied, "A woman who needs insulin." I think I gave you half a point for trying. Everyone needs insulin. It's just that diabetics can't produce their own. I remember we had a test on Chinese characters, on which we had to write a definition. It's a proverb that translates roughly as, "Even a school dog can learn to read and write in 3 years." But one student translated it as, "If you haven't figured something out in 3 years, then you're dumber than a dog." I'm taking an oral exam in French. The girl wanted to say, "Je voyage en avion." I traveled by plane. But she said, "Je viols en avion." I was harassed on the plane. How we laughed. She didn't mean what she said at all. My first day in Russia. I went to order a medium cappuccino, but I said medium cappuccino. Whoops. Japanese test. The student wrote instead of answering, "I don't know anything. I'm sorry. I didn't study. I've disgraced my whole family and my cow." And next to it, I painted the saddest cow imaginable. Changed. If anyone doesn't know about the family and the cow, this is a reference to Mulan. However, Mulan was Chinese. Changed too. There was also a task where they had to rewrite Japanese numbers with Arabic numerals. Well, like 1, 2, 3. One genius wrote the entire assignment in Roman numerals. At first I laughed. I had a student who gave me a code that had obscene comments. I had to have a serious conversation with him about professionalism, but I didn't tell him what hell was in my bachelor's degree code. I'm not a teacher, but I take driving exams. I ask the question, what is the penalty if you don't stop when the police slow you down? The student's answer is, if you drive fast enough, then no. When I was teaching in the 1st grade, we learn new words every week. One time we were talking about the word might, and I asked the kids to give an example of something powerful, and most of the kids answered with president and superhero, but one said babies. I was like, why? Babies have power because they can cry and get whatever they want. It looks like someone has a younger brother or sister. My mom used to be a teacher. One day she was testing 7th graders on geography and asked, which island was considered the largest before the discovery of Australia? One of the children replied, a trick question. Australia does not exist. Not a teacher. One time I didn't prepare for the test at all. I left almost all the answers blank. The last question was the only one I answered. It asked, what is haiku? Please write a definition and give an example. My haiku was like this. I failed this test. I should have studied better. I hate myself now. My teacher wrote, not bad, and gave the maximum score for this question. Then, by the end of the year, I was already preparing normally. Haiku is the most overrated bullshit in the history of literature. I remember when we were studying haiku, I said, so what? Is that all? You promised us something big in the last lesson, but it doesn't even smell like that here. This form of poetry is very poorly translated into English. Trust me, Japanese makes a lot more sense in haiku. During a lecture on astronomy, our professor asked the audience how many stars there are in our galaxy. No one raised their hand, so he chose some random guy and asked him to answer. He thought for a bit and said, well, at least a couple dozen, no? The teacher sighed sadly and replied, I teach preschool children, or rather 2-year-olds. Sometimes I give them picture cards and ask them what they show. Once they came across a card with a gallon of milk. I ask, where does it come from? Immediately, one of my pets shouts, Mommy! Milk comes from moms. Basically, he was right. I'm taking the biology exam. The theme is Frogs and amphibians. Assignment. Name a few ways to save frogs from extinction. Answer. It is necessary to ban the opening of French restaurants throughout the country. Perhaps not the most outstanding and effective way to protect frogs. That was the answer from one of my classmates. When the teacher crossed it out as incorrect, we went to complain so that he would change his mind. Question. Can you explain the consequences of the German attack on the Netherlands in 1940? Answer. No. Technically, the answer is yes, is also correct. In fact, it's just that the teacher made up the question crookedly. Oh, one of my students had a cool answer. I'll just start by clarifying. In our country, if 70% of a class fails a test, then everyone has to write it all over again. And the best score out of 2 attempts goes to the magazine. Once we had a test, which everyone failed, except for one kid who wrote for the maximum score. Naturally, when rewriting, he could no longer improve his score, so instead of answering, he wrote, "A cheesecake recipe." I took the time to cook it, and it turned out to be just awesome. I had a professor at uni whom I hated very much. When I took his final exam, I decided to use Roman numerals instead of the usual ones. It wasn't easy, but I did it. Shortly after the exam ended, he sent me an email saying that he refused to evaluate my work. I forwarded his letter to the dean, to which the dean replied that technically, Roman numerals are still a viable type of numbering. I'm not a professor, but I've checked exam papers before. I've seen people draw in the answers, write jokes in them, and beg the examiners to give a satisfactory grade. Thanks to such jokes, it was not so tedious to check these works by 12 hours per day. Once someone drew a dinosaur and then tried to erase it. However, it looks like he had a very bad wash. The dude almost wiped the paper to dust in an attempt to erase the tracks of this horribly painted dinosaur. Another time, someone wrote in very small print. There were also cases when people openly sucked up to me, like Snooge, "You're so awesome, I'd love to bake you a cake. By the way, can you give me a normal grade?" Changed. By the way, information for everyone who is currently at university. Sometimes all this crap really rolls. If you have managed to appease the appraiser, then he can give you a couple of indulgences. One day, during a test, my student raised his hand to ask a question, a hand that was covered in formulas. My dad once told me that one of his students complained that they didn't pass what was in the question. The question was, is it possible to get pregnant from shaking hands? It was the first course of honey. It's like a trick question, like, it can't be that simple. There has to be some hidden answer. Like, maybe it's still possible to get pregnant under some crazy circumstances? I'll give you an example of my dumb answers. My school buddies and I had one of these memes or something. Kirk, we wrote either 42 or 6 or Jesus to all the questions that we didn't know the answer to. Once we had a physics exam that I wasn't preparing for at all, and I decided to write these 3 answers everywhere. The funny thing is that I answered one of the questions almost correctly. Where I wrote 42, the answer was 43, so they gave me 1 point for it. As a result, my score was slightly higher than the minimum. I also wrote once in a physics exam as an answer, Jesus. When I got the job back, it said, "I'll accept this as the answer, for the first and last time." I'm not a teacher, but I know someone who misspelled his name on an exam. I'm not a teacher either, but we had a grammar test in 7th grade. There were 10 questions. For each one, you could get 3 points. I filled up all the questions and forgot to sign the paper. I got -3 out of 30. I teach at a school where students study on the iPad apps, and all our works, respectively, are also written in digital form. So, on one test, a student inserted a pizza emoji instead of answering. I don't even remember what the question was anymore, but I remember the answer well. I teach English in China. We study professions. I ask the class a question. Who do you want to become? The model students answer, in all seriousness, I want to become a potato. My favorite answer in 20+ years of teaching. Question. In what year did the American Revolution begin? Answer. In France. I still can't figure out what was going on in his head. I didn't even dare ask him to explain himself. My dad used to work as a teacher. He taught French. One day, he gave the students a task where they had to translate the text into English. I do not know what the student had in mind, but he translated the sentence, Elle marcha le long de la rue avec un matelot barbu as, oh, with a bearded mattress. Seriously? A mattress? Sailor is not equal to sailor. Thanks for watching. Please like, write comments, and watch our videos.